because I had visitors over that time. I am very pleased that I can welcome him now to our webcast. Welcome very much, Dr. Pekka Reinikainen. It is a joy to have you with us today. You are calling us from Finland today, so I've been told that Finnish people can often speak multiple languages. How many languages can you speak?
Thank you for your kind invitation, Lucian. That is indeed so that Finnish people must speak many languages. I speak 5 because nobody speaks Finnish, and Finnish is a very, very difficult language to learn, almost impossible. It has been said that it's one of the ancient languages with no articles and prepositions. It's a mess. You can only learn it if you have learned the grammar in mother's womb.
I was just going to point that out. So parents, talk to your babies in the womb and they will speak the language fluently. Yes, very early on. Thank you. And I understand that you are involved with the Creation magazine in Finnish. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are 5 medical doctors, several engineers, teachers, and other specialists. We produce the Creation magazine in Finnish and translate many of your books in Finnish. We make radio programs, YouTube programs. I work on a Christian TV channel and produce 2 programs weekly where I take up the creation message, Facebook, Twitter, everything. And the authorities in Finland were quite shocked some years ago when they conducted an interview which showed that 30% of the Finns do not believe in evolution. That was a shock. So maybe we have done something, and we have over 2,300 subscribers to the Finnish version of Creation magazine.
Very good. Well, yes, I think we have another magazine in Hungarian, if I'm not mistaken. So we are very thankful for the work that you do, that many may read and believe that there is a creator. And today we're going to continue now with your talk on this webcast. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucian. Dear friends, I will talk about man's life in water and on land. Next slide, please. Today, the theory of evolution from water to man is literally dead in the water. Today, we can, with good reason, say that nothing in biology makes sense in the light of neo-Darwinism. Charles Darwin was a good observer of nature, but his book, Origin of Species, is nothing but pure speculation. He speculates in his book over 600 times. As a child, Darwin was very good at telling stories. The family used to gather around him and listen to his fables. I think it can be said that Darwin launched a tradition of storytelling in origin science. In origin science, we can say that he who has the best story has the truth of the day. To Darwin's credit must be said that he wanted problems to be studied from all aspects and all sides. But this his followers have forgotten and have become dogmatic about the truth of neo-Darwinism. Darwin also pointed out several problems that might disprove his theory, and these problems have all materialized, but they are ignored and nobody cares about it because neo-Darwinism is a proclaimed truth. But today, if Darwin was still alive, I think he would discard his theory in the light of today's knowledge. He could now understand that the beaks of his finches on Galapagos Islands, they change probably with an epigenetic mechanisms launched by El Niño weather changes. But today, the obvious truth is that nothing works in neo-Darwinism and the theory is in ruins, because there are no evolutionary answers to the vital questions about the origin of life and the origin of waters of oceans, as Lucian pointed out, and indeed why there is still dry land left after billions of years of erosion. As Lucian said that all the continents, he quoted John Morris, after 40 million years, all the continents would be as sand on the sea bottom, and the whole planet would be covered with a blanket of 2 miles, almost 2 miles of water. Yes, water is important. Life needs water, but water is at the same time toxic to life, because proteins come apart in excess of water. Water can kill you if you drink too much of it. That might surprise you, but drinking too much is very dangerous. And water cannot produce life. We hear almost every week stories that a new planet or a new moon has water and it has been found, and that means, according to the evolutionists, that there could be life, but this is nonsense. Next slide, please. As usual, only Bible has the answer about water and life. It tells us in 2 Peter 3:5, for this they willfully forget that there were heavens from of old and an earth formed out of water and amid water by the word of God. Water is indeed an astonishing substance. You can read more about it from creation.com, The Wonders of Water. We are mostly made up of water. 66% of the human body is water. Our incredible kidneys maintain this water balance even if we drink just 1 liter or over 10 liters per day. It was a mystery how the kidneys do that. Doctors thought that we'll never find out what the kidney does, but in the 1950s, it was found out the astonishing mechanism of concentration and diluting of urine. It's incredible. Next slide, please. Evolution is nothing but unanswered questions. Where did life come from? Scientists do not know. Where did the genetic code come from? Nobody knows. Where did the information in the code come from? There are no scientific answers to any of the key questions. It is interesting that the world's oldest scientific society, probably the Royal Society, launched an Evolution 2.0 prize where $10 million is offered to the first person to self-organize chemicals into a code. But what does a code do? But a mere code would accomplish absolutely nothing by itself. There must also be coded information in the code. Next slide, please. Where did the information come from? Origin of information is the central question in origin of life. It is critical to evolution itself because information always originates from outside of matter. But as usual, the Bible reveals us the origin source of information. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. Next slide, please. We do not even know what life in itself is. First, the technical definition. Life is self-organizing chemistry which reproduces itself and passes on its evolved characteristics encoded in DNA. It has the ability to reduce local disorganization, thus locally contravening the third law of thermodynamics. That sounds very impressive, but what is life really about, if anything? The two possibilities are: life is either a meaningless accident arising from the laws of physics operating in a meaningless universe, or it is a step in a planned experiment. Next slide, please. There is absolutely no credible mechanism for producing man from a single cell. Why is that? Random mutations and natural selection can hardly accomplish it. On the contrary, random mutations cause problems like cancer, but creation of all new anatomy and physiology is beyond randomness's reach. When you look at this question from the last universal common ancestor, as they call the first hypothetical cell becoming man, always, when you look at it, always consider all the details and think yourself. Never accept simplistic neo-Darwinian stories about the origin, because you have so many hurdles on the way. For instance, the transition from a prokaryote to eukaryote, from a bacterial cell to a human cell, you must have all cell organelles, microtubules, everything. Where did they come from? This is called the theory of endosymbiosis, about bacteria eating other bacteria. It is dead. That is the first major hurdle. And then you have to go from unicellular to multicellular life. It requires, among other things, the evolution of programmed cell death. This is an unsolved mystery. Why would evolution program cell death to create multicellular organisms? Today, it is widely known among experts that random mutations coupled with natural selection, the neo-Darwinian mechanism, it simply does not work. But this is not openly admitted and is still taught in schools. Why is that? Because of the fear that creationists would use this fact that neo-Darwinism has crashed. I didn't say that they say it themselves. They admit that they fear that creationists would use this, and that's why they don't put it on the table. Instead, they are looking for a new mechanism to replace neo-Darwinism. It is feverishly searched. They have emergency meetings to find something. What are the candidates? Even giant viruses which would push evolution. Somebody has said that quantum mechanism guides evolution. Well, you might ask, okay, if it's so, where did quantum mechanism come from? Even gravity has been suggested as the motor of evolution. But today we know something that Darwin didn't know. We know that organisms continuously monitor, look at the environment, and this causes epigenetic changes in the following generations without changing the DNA code. Changing the DNA code is dangerous because one code symbol can code for up to 20 products or functions, depending on the reading frame and direction that you read the code, from left to right or from right to left. This is very fantastic because it may be that all this, and looks like this information is programmed by God there to make us survive. I have an example. My grandparents lived in Finland, was great famine. There was not enough to eat. And if my grandmother didn't have enough to eat, they used to eat pine bark in the bread. So my grandmother has an epigenetic change which I inherit, and it makes me live longer, and I can experience hunger. This is very fascinating. It's programmed into the genetic code, this epigenetic mechanism. There are certainly other mechanisms also, but I will not go into that. The next slide, please. We think we know everything, but we don't even know what human consciousness is. I might say that I have been working as a GP for 40 years, and I try to know something. I've been teaching medical students for 20 years. I must at least give the impression that I know more than they do. But once you get older, you get wiser, and you can say that you are well educated only when you start to understand how little you know. Research generates all new questions faster than it finds answers to the age-old questions. And the thing is that we often do not even know what to ask. If we find something, we ask something that we wouldn't even dream of asking before. So you have to be humble in front of this mystery that God has created. Einstein was a very wise man, and he said that don't think that God will reveal to us all his secrets. And I think he was right. Next slide, please. Well, back to the Royal Society's prize. At the Royal Society in Great Britain on the 31st of May 2019, Perry Marshall explained the story behind the $10 million prize. Quote, "The origin of life's code is the most fundamental scientific question that can be precisely defined. The breakthrough may be as valuable as Einstein's E equals mc to the second power or the invention of the transistor." This kind of fundamental problems have not been solved, and I am sure that they cannot be solved because a brain, a huge brain, much greater than ours, has planned this planet and the life on it. Next slide, please. Origin of the genetic code is the universal enigma. But interesting is that an even greater dilemma that the Royal Society doesn't talk about, that is intimately related to it, is the origin of the building blocks of life's proteins. Proteins are made up of 20-some amino acids. I'll give some comments about that later. The standard code is wonderful. It is substantially robust to translational misreadings as well as mutations. The code is selected from an astronomical choice of possibilities. Some have said it's 1.5 to multiplied to 10 to the 85th power of possibilities. That's more possibilities than there are atoms in the universe that we see. But the code appears to be quite optimal, as there is an inbuilt redundancy in the code to tolerate mutations and copying errors in this fallen world. Next slide, please. Redundancy means that several combinations of 3 of its DNA's bases can code for the same amino acid. This, coupled with an inbuilt proofreading and mutation correcting mechanism, makes it possible for us to exist for a short while only, but no more than about 6,000 years in this fallen world. In spite of this repair mechanism, which has to be already in the first cell, over 1,100,000 recessive copying errors have so far accumulated in mankind's genome, and we will soon go extinct before of this. Recessive copying error means that it doesn't kill, but it accumulates, and once there are enough recessive copying errors, then the species will die out. Indeed, it is obviously highly improbable, I would say impossible, for sexually reproducing organisms to exist for millions of years, and the reason is the copying errors and mutations in the code. The code tolerates only so and so many. It has inbuilt mechanism to tolerate mutations and copying errors for about 6,000, 10,000 years, no more. This is a scientific fact. Next slide, please. The end of life in this fallen world is approaching at an ever-increasing speed, because the repair machinery of copying errors is also falling apart with accelerating speed because of accumulating copying errors in the machinery's code. You see, the repair machinery is also falling apart. The speedy mutational meltdown of life is on the horizon. Another important reason for the deterioration of the code is the preferred mutational disappearance of GC pairs from the DNA code. This is very interesting. Next slide, please. AT remains in the code, but GCs are eliminated. One possible reason for the GC's preferred disappearance could be thermodynamics, since GC are joined by 3 hydrogen bonds, AT by 2 bonds only. So it is conceivable that mutations preferably eliminate GCs. If this is so, we don't know. It is the definitive coup de grace for the claimed millions of years of evolution, because after millions of years, there would be no GCs left in DNA codes. This is very interesting, and this is also a very serious challenge to the millions of years. Next slide, please. Codes problems increase even further. The mystery of proteins. Who choose the 20-some amino acids of life? This is a very good question. DNA co-discoverer Francis Crick's seminal paper posits that the actual allocation of amino acids to codons is mainly accidental. He thought it was accidental, but today we know that this is not so. Life's amino acids have been carefully chosen from a huge sea of poisonous molecules. But how could this have happened? It looks like the actual molecular alphabet in use is quite optimal. The computer study has recently demonstrated this. This is a very interesting new find. Next slide, please. Why only certain amino acids can be used? It is the shape of their molecular side chains that makes the difference when folding them into proteins. There's a picture of butyrate kinase enzyme with its intricate folding. The folding of many vital proteins is done by special molecules called chaperones. So here is yet another chicken and egg dilemma. Which evolved first? Next slide, please. New evidence and knowledge shows that functioning protein types are extremely rare. Citation from scientists. The overall prevalence of sequences performing a specific function by any domain-sized fold may be as low as 1 possibility in 10 to the power of 77, adding to the body of evidence that functional folds require highly extraordinary sequences. Because of this extreme rarity of functioning protein types, should Darwin's theory of evolution be dismissed? Next slide, please. Yale University computer scientist David Gelernter is famed for his specific scientific expertise. He is now a confessed Darwin skeptic. He has said the following, quote, Darwinism is no longer just a scientific theory, but a basis of a worldview and an emergency religion for the many troubled souls who need one, end of quote. The reason for Gelenter's change of mind is obvious. The probability of getting just one functioning protein, 150 amino acids long, is one possibility out of 10 to the power of 195 choices. Even the smallest of cells need over 300 such lucky strikes to function. Next slide, please. And this is not all, it gets worse. Things get desperate for evolution, since DNA and proteins accomplish absolutely nothing that might be called life without a cell membrane that is indispensable when living in water. Life and heredity is not a chain of molecules with a code, but life is in fact cells. It's not bare DNA. It's just like a PC, personal computer, is more than a lonely USB memory stick. Today we know that life is a RNA computer. DNA is the memory bank, which guides the use of the data. 20,000 genes can produce hundreds of thousands of proteins depending on the reading frame and the reading direction, from left to right or from right to left. And RNA is not just giving messages from the nucleus to the cytoplasm, but also information from the body, from the cytoplasm back to the nucleus. It's a computer that is working there, RNA. Life is an RNA computer. Next slide, please. Only intelligent design can explain the ingenious cell membrane that keeps every living cell both sealed against and selectively open by active transport to its environment. A membrane that must be watertight and leaking at the same time. Marcos Eberlin has written a book about this, and he says that engineers would run away if asked to construct such a membrane. And it's important to understand that there is no cell life without this astonishing feat of engineering that must have been present in the very first cell, because otherwise excess water would have taken apart all nascent chains of molecules like DNA, RNA, and proteins. The cell's emerging proteins are protected from water in the ribosome factory. Otherwise, water would kill the cell. Next slide, please. It is becoming more and more obvious than ever that God has reserved the monopoly to create exclusively to himself. All this search for extraterrestrial intelligence and abiogenesis, it's useless. It's like trying to make gold from lead, because God has reserved the monopoly to create exclusively to himself. It's quite obvious. In other words, evolution from water to the first cell is impossible because water, chemistry, and physics prevent it. Only God can do it. But even if such a miracle had happened, the road to man remains blocked because. Next slide, please. Yet another severe problem for neo-Darwinian evolution theory is to explain the evolution of sexual reproduction. Evolutionists have usually assumed that sexual reproduction evolved because it somehow facilitates survival in the Darwinian sense. Note the word somehow, has no content. Because this makes no sense, because nobody can beat bacteria that reproduce every 20 minutes, and bacteria also have a huge pangenome. What is a pangenome? Next slide, please. We're often told that bacteria are simple cells, but that is not true. They may have, E. coli may possibly have even more genes in its pangenome than we have genes. It's possible. Pangenome calculations thus far indicate that E. coli genomic diversity represents an open pangenome model containing a reservoir of more than 13,000 genes. Some researchers say there are 20,000, some say there are 40,000, but this is being investigated. But what it shows is that offspring of greater variety is therefore richly available for bacteria, who are in fact the real rulers of this planet from an obvious evolutionary perspective. Might surprise you, but the bacteria are the kings here. Next slide, please. Since asexual reproduction has the advantage of producing far more offspring. It provides evolution much more to select from. Further, the offspring are far less vulnerable because they skip or rapidly progress through the infant or larval stages. They have like no childhood. We have our children up to 12 years, and teenagers have the adult brain only at the age of 24 years. This is good for our parents to know so they can tolerate the teenagers. But this is no evolutionary advantage. In contrast, the brief reproduction period, just a few years, and fertilization once a month for man and few offspring for further sexual reproduction produces such clear disadvantages that one may wonder why sexual reproduction would evolve at all. Next slide, please. Harmful mutations are weeded out more effectively in asexual populations. On the contrary, in sexual populations, recessive mutations accumulate. Thus far, there are 1,100,000 in the humankind's genome. And this can cause serious problems when reproducing with close relatives and lead to rapid extinction as they accumulate in the long run. Indeed, it is interesting that the Bible warns in Leviticus 18:6, and note here that before Moses' time, it was not yet a problem, but then it started to be a problem. God said that none of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord. This means no marriages between relatives because it is dangerous. Next slide, please. The importance of the origin of sex. Sex is an unsolved mystery. Steve Jones, in his book, The Language of Genes, says so, quote, "Sex must be important because it is so expensive. The problem is that a sexual female wastes time first in finding a mate and then in producing sons who carry only half of her inheritance. What do we need males for?" asks Steve Jones. A female who gave them up would be able to produce twice as many daughters as before. They would carry her genes. We are still not certain why males exist and why, if we must have them at all, nature needs so many. Surely one or two would be enough, but for some reason, the ratio of males to females remains equal. Next slide, please. And it becomes even more interesting. Evolution is totally inadequate to explain why males exist. And we can ask, is evolution in fact eliminating males? This seems to be the case. Men are losing their Y chromosome. The number of genes on the Y has plummeted from more than 1,000 to roughly 50, a loss of more than 95%. The X chromosome, in contrast, stands strongly at roughly 1,000 genes. Humans and most other mammals use the familiar XY system. A gene on the Y chromosome triggers the development of sperm determining male sex. Next slide, please. Sperm counts in Western countries have dropped by more than 50% since the 1970s. The current state of reproductive affairs can't continue much longer without threatening human survival, warns Mount Sinai fertility scientist Dr. Swana Swan in her book Countdown, published about a year ago. It is a global existential crisis. We are already seeing the effects. Worldwide fertility has dropped by 50% between 1960 and 2015. This is a very serious challenge to the millions of years and the long ages of the forefathers, so-called forefathers of men. Next slide, please. The lack of evidence of any biological systems that can bridge the chasm between sexual and asexual reproduction either today or in the past is also a major difficulty with evolution theory. The complete lack of any transitional forms for all sexual traits is a huge major fossil gap. The complete lack of transitional forms bridging asexual cellular division from the more complex asexual and sexual reproduction is not explained, but confounded by the fact that some plants and simple animals can reproduce both sexually and asexually. This would confer upon the organism an enormous evolutionary advantage. Its genes could be passed on regardless of whether a mate was available. Next, please. A transition from cellular division, mitosis, to sexual reproduction, division, meiosis, is also a mystery. Nobody can credibly explain the evolution of the mechanism of mitosis, cellular division, but evolution of meiosis is a nightmare to explain. Why meiosis? Meiosis and its carefully programmed crossing over, it means mixing of genes, guarantees that all human beings are unique. Never two alike will be born. This is important because, as we know from the Bible, God knows us by name. He has written our names on the palm of his hand, it says in the Bible. Next, please. It is important to comprehend that both sexual and asexual reproduction are an important part of the overall functioning and survival of life on Earth. We could not exist without viruses, bacteria, fungi, plants, and animals. This is an all or nothing world. It would also be impossible for bacteria to fulfill their critical ecological role of recycling if they reproduce sexually. You see, everything is planned, everything has a meaning. Next, please. Sexuality exists because it is part of God's plan for humans and other organisms. Evolution, on the other hand, focuses on survival only. It is difficult even to speculate on the possible evolution of gonads that fit together and a sexual reproductive system from a hypothetical common ancestor of all life. And it's important to note that sex would not be selected for until it was highly functional and superior to cellular division. Next slide, please. The hurdle of fertilization is the last nail in evolution's coffin. Fertilization is the fusion of egg and sperm. It is a very complicated process and not completely understood. How does a man's sperm find its way to a woman's egg? Sperm must travel from the vagina over 3,000 times the sperm's length. It is like swimming over 3 miles without certainty of reaching the desired target. There are over 200 million sperm at the starting line, but only 1 in a million reach the final showdown in the woman's fallopian tube. Next slide. Why so many? 200 million sperm. Otherwise, we would have no viable offspring in the long term, but the solution is not problem-free since 80% of birth defects come from men because there are a lot of copying errors in sperm production, a lot of mutations, as there are many millions of daily cell divisions. Therefore, good quality control is essential, and the quality control is achieved mainly by women. Next slide. What propels the sperm? The sperm swim actively, and the structures of the cervix and tubes of the woman guide them. The timing must be exactly right to avoid the immunological defense system. The sperm are stored and matured in the tubes for the final sprint, and sperm's thermotactic and chemotactic guidance systems are activated, like you might give an analogy to cruise missiles. The woman's body helps guide sperm to the target, but at the same time it builds hurdles to them so that only the best and strongest get near the egg. Plus over 30 other factors needed. I know 2 specialists, 2 professors who have fertility clinics and try to assist today's people to have children. It is so that fertility clinics must assist 20% of couples today to conceive. And you see, this is very complicated. We don't even know everything about it. And it is again an all or nothing system. Next slide, please. What is the life in the water in the womb? We, all of us, have spent 9 months in swimming in the water. Too many people today ignore the facts about human development in the womb. More to the point, the unfolding story of life in the womb tends to make people uneasy because it places a miraculous and human face on the lives of the unborn and makes it clear that abortion is murder. Next slide, please. So just how did you develop in the womb? What is the awesome world of life swimming in the womb for 9 months like? Fetal physiology and birth. Fetal physiology relies on the placenta as the organ of gas exchange, nutrition, metabolism, and excretion. It is a veritable intensive care unit. In the fetal-placental circulation, most of the oxygenated blood flows from the placenta back to the baby through the umbilical vein and is shunted away from the high-resistance pulmonary circuit of the baby's lungs via the foramen oval and the ductus arteriosus into the low-resistance systemic circuit of the baby. This is very, very complicated and ingenious. It's much more complicated than in life. And where did it come from? All or nothing again. And then at birth, from an aquatic organism to a land organism in a few minutes. I have assisted, of course, as a medical doctor, many births, and I know how hard it can be, and you get these all blue babies out and think that what will they survive or not? But they do mostly. This is where the exciting things actually happen. It is very exciting to help in birth. This is much more exciting than the academic account of evolution's fabled fishy forefather or ours emerging from water to land. Next slide, please. Amazingly, the majority of newly born infants make the transition from fetal to postnatal circulation without significant difficulty. That is a miracle. Also, mother survives because her arteries feeding the placenta are programmed to close. Look at all the details which must be programmed into this. Sex is really risky business. Why should it evolve? I don't go into the details, but there is some text that you can study later on and see what is going on there. And also, a woman's immune system must be partially closed down to tolerate baby in womb. This makes the woman, puts the woman in danger, like the COVID infection was more dangerous in pregnant women because their immune system was partially closed down. This is why women who are expecting babies should be vaccinated. There's such an enormous amount of details that we can really, it's safe to ask, why should it evolve? Why should sex evolve? There's nothing but problems and difficulties to explain in neo-Darwinistic fashion. Next slide, please. But as usual, the origin of man and woman is explained in the Bible. Paul describes our origin in Acts 17, 26, 28. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. We are his offspring. Also in Hebrews 2:11 we read, both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. This is very exciting. As Christians, we are members of God's family. Next slide, please. But what means from one man? It shows that we are family. But where did the woman come from? The Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. Genesis 2:22. But can this be true? Absolutely, it is quite obvious. Why? Simply because nobody knows a way of getting a man and a woman through evolution. It was a factual miracle. Let us remember that creation was a miracle. Also, there are only men and women. There are absolutely no intermediary forms, as the LGBTQ establishment claims. Men produce sperm, women have eggs, and that's it. It is incredible that many, even academically formed people, can say that there are 500 different sexes. That is utter nonsense. Makes sometimes you wonder, have people stopped thinking? Next slide, please. Eve is again, according to the Bible, the mother of all living. That is a very important, interesting way of putting it. The mother of all living. Genesis 3:20. This is also a scientific fact because heredity is cellular. You can see more details in creation.com. Heredity is foundationally cellular, not genetic. Eve's eggs make it literally possible for us to exist for at least about 6,000 years because eggs do not divide in the ovaries. This is very important. The baby girl has all the eggs there already in the womb and they don't divide in her lifetime. And as a consequence, much less copying errors are produced. And as I mentioned already, men produce tens of millions of sperm every day. As a result, only a few egg generations separate us from our great-grandmother Eve. And that is the reason why mutations and or copying errors have not yet killed us. You see, God has thought about everything. He foresaw the fall of man. Of course, he knows everything. He knew also that man would fall, and he planned it this way. Next slide, please. As the Bible says, in the beginning, God created them male and female. Genesis 1:26-27. Also, Jesus quotes Genesis in Mark 10:6. From the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. 2 times in the beginning, indeed, from the very beginning. The study of the DNA code's original perfect composition, the RNA computer, and its subsequent speedy meltdown proves this too. We can today almost say that we have the Bible in our DNA. We have proof of the perfect creation, the fall, family archives, and the end of this world. This is incredible. Next slide, please. Christianity is based on 3 important principles. No life without creation, no death without the fall, no eternal life without redemption in Christ, and baptism by water. In John 3:5, it says, Jesus answered and said unto him, Nicodemus, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said unto him, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. This fallen world and life, death, and eternity make sense only in the light of our Bible's historical account. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Reinikainen. That was very stimulating. A lot of information. It was intriguing, I think, the title of your talk, Man's Life in Water and on Land. And we now have seen what you've done with that. Very, very quickly, just before I close this presentation, I've got one slide I just want to show you. Another medical doctor, actually a surgeon. Some of you will know of this book. Dr. Vij Sudhira was a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. And if you like things medical, but it covers a lot of other things biological as well, this is really a bit of a Rolls Royce or a Daimler or a Mercedes, whichever flash car you like, of biblical creation books on biology. So I'd recommend that to you. That is just a superb book, and it's on offer today, £25 down to £21. And that is still bang up to date as a really heavy hitter, just full of information. So I highly recommend that book to anyone who's keen on these subjects. I'm going to stop sharing a moment. Again, Pekka, we appreciate very much what you've shared with us. It's been fascinating. I'm going to just put a question from myself first, and then I'm going to, if anyone's got a question for the good doctor, perhaps you'd like to put them down in the chat. My question is, you mentioned the pangenome in Escherichia coli, E. coli bacterium. Do you mean by that the different forms of E. coli? And if you look at the total of the information possibilities in those, that's the pangenome. Tell us what the pangenome is.
Yes, it is a way for the E. coli to survive with the very little ballast. I mean, they swim there and they give to their friends information that they need. It's a packet, like a you know, the plasmids, and that's another thing. They give the resistance to antibiotics via the plasmids. They exchange them.
So can you just explain to folks who won't be biologically minded or not know the details, how, so you're saying bacteria can share genetic information with one another?
Yeah, they do share, because it is very good. Because why have we bacteria? Because they recycle and they break down things. They're very important. In our gut, we have bacteria, and bacteria affect our brain. We can be depressed because we have the wrong bacteria in our gut. We can pick up too much weight because we have the wrong bacteria. But the bacteria, like E. coli, they have a pangenome, which is that it's not practical for the E. coli to carry 13,500 genes. So it carries only maybe 6,000 or 7,000. But if it gets into trouble, it asks a friend for help. They can transfer this with different mechanisms. The first was known as the plasmids, which are little bits of DNA information, which is nasty because they make some E. coli multi-resistant. They then can kill us. I mean, people coming from countries where they use carelessly antibiotics, they bring with them bacteria that are extremely dangerous when they come to our hospitals, and we have to put them into separate rooms and try to fight them. So this is, we wrote a book about this with Professor Matti Leisola, who is a Finnish research professor, and originally it was a book by Germans, Reinhard Juncker and Sigrid Scherer, and we discussed this ability of bacteria to rule this planet. I mean, they are the real rulers. And it is important to also know that there is no simple life. All life is very, very complicated because it uses enzymes which make the reactions millions of times faster than otherwise. So it's ingenious from God's side to plan this. There is not a product that is created in this creation which is not recycled. That otherwise, if it were something that we couldn't, the nature couldn't recycle, we would be in trouble. But I don't want to go deeper into this. That gets too technical. But it is interesting to know that new things come up almost daily. And as I said, we don't even know today what to ask. But when we find something extraordinary, then we make totally new questions. And this is how the science goes forward. They're always saying in Finland that we who believe in creations, we are against science. On the contrary, I love science because science gives me the best tools to fight neo-Darwinism. We kill the neo-Darwinism with the help of science, of course. And that is I'm very thankful to CMI for our cooperation because we are using your materials and publishing your wonderful magazine. And I think, as you said, that it's very important to prescribe to the magazine because many people have found the Lord with your magazine. That is good quality. As Carl Wieland, who was also a medical doctor, said that the quality must be high. And this, in fact, is better than the secular magazines, I think. I congratulate you on your products and especially on your, Philip, on your book on Darwin. It was very good because you said what happens if you discard the fall and what happens to Jesus Christ and how Darwin was wondering whether he killed God or not. It's the book you gave out a couple of years ago.
I think you're referring to Evolution and the Christian Faith.
That's it. I think that's a very good, important book for me to understand just what Darwin was thinking and how dangerous it is to mix this neo-Darwinism and Christianity.
Just really quickly, you mentioned several scientists you've worked with. Dr. Matti Laisola, how do you say his name? Matti Laisola?
Matti Leisola.
Matti Leisola. He appears in our Darwin, The Voyage That Shook the World documentary, for those who remember that, and also briefly in Evolution's Achilles Heels documentary. So if you're interested to find out more, you can check that out. I don't think there's been any particular questions. People have said thank you for the great presentation, interesting talk, and have commended it. There's a few comments in the chat that you can usefully use, and you can actually copy and paste the chat, by the way, into a Word document or a word processing document if you want to save any of the chats that that contain information and links to articles you may want to check out later. A quick question from me. Another one that intrigued me. I was interested, you said that the teenager's brain is still not fully developed, and it's not until a person's 24 years old, and you're saying this as a medical doctor, that their brain is fully developed. Now, clearly it's not about intelligence, because young people can pass exams and do very brilliant things. What aspects of the brain are still developing in your late teens and early 20s? Wisdom is lacking.
Wisdom,
yeah.
You can pass exams, but you're not wise. Like
yeah.
you can.
But is there anything biologically or taking place in the brain, or did I misunderstand you?
There is. We have been. There's a lot of studying about the genes that steer our brain. Maybe 3,500 of them, and the fact is that people are getting less intelligent all the time because of mutations. But this capacity to mature the brain is to use the data that you have accomplished, you have accumulated to your good. I mean, young people make silly mistakes, older people don't. And especially one thing is the binge drinking. I mean, if you start drinking only after you're 24, very few people become alcoholics. But as a teenager, if you drink, this, I mentioned the fall of the sperm, it's the binge drinking of teenagers, boys, that destroys their testicles when they drink teenage, because there's an enzyme in the testes that makes alcohol into acetaldehyde, in the liver and in the testes. And if you binge drink when you're a teenage boy, it can destroy the production of sperm at the critical stage when the factory is starting. I've been trying to write about this in medical journals, but the opposition is strong because the lobby selling the alcohol is so strong. It's very difficult to get this. But that is the only explanation for the so fast change. The change is so fast. In a few generations, 50% fall in Western men. Note Western, not in Muslim countries like that. But that is the reason I want to say it now, because I have the chance. Don't binge drink as a boy, as a teenager. That affects your fertility, that is for sure. But the brain is a fact that you have adult brain when you're 24, 25, and all the factors come in, and all the connections that the brain is a plastic instrument. It changes all the time. The more you study, the more connections you get, the better you're at handling all that is in there. And it's a USB memory stick, your brain, that never gets full. But the problem is to get things out from there. That is the problem, but it sucks in everything. Of course, there's control that throws away then all the nonsense that you don't need, but the necessary things are stored out in there. But I can quote one researcher who said that we know almost everything about the structure of the brain, but we don't know how it works. That's the situation today. We don't have nobody knows what is consciousness. We don't know. We don't know why we think, and this is I think it's God gave us soul when he breathed it into our nostrils, when he created us with his own hands, as the Bible says. And then he didn't breathe into nostrils of animals, but he breathed it into nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. That is where our consciousness comes from, and that is why everybody knows God, that's for sure. They're just running away from him. And we know what is good and what is bad. That comes from God. God has breathed his breath into us. We have souls, we are conscious, and that explains it, as Bible explains all these things when you get deeper into it. Thanks for the questions.
I'm just going to quickly mention a few resources, and then we might have one time from one or two more questions. Body by Design. It's a book that's been around for some time, but it's still very good. The subtitle is Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. So a medical doctor has put this together, and that is normally retailing at £11. It's softback, and on special offer over this weekend at £8.50. So Body by Design, if you search our web store, you'll find that. This one, The Guide to the Human Body, this does have a lot of color pictures. It's really for young people, really a family book. It's really for anybody who's interested in human biology, and I would say it would suit anyone from probably 10 or 11 through to adults. Okay, that one is normally £14. It's a hardback book from the Institute of Creation Research. These are quite expensive to bring across, I have to say, from the United States. As you would know, fuel prices have gone up for fuel, prices are going up for carriage and transit, prices are going up for paper. I don't know if you know this, but we're discovering that in the United States, paper has become exorbitantly expensive. The paper produced to produce Creation magazine in the US has gone up more than 2 or 3 times just in the last few months. So that's an issue. So I'm saying that as an excuse for why we can't make these much cheaper, but we have brought the price